it's like a black music filtered through an Italian neighborhood. It comes out with an attitude. It's like, yo. But, you know, like back in the 50s.
He was a street kid from the Bronx who survived the plane crash that killed Buddy Holly. But that wasn't Dion DiMucci's biggest shock. At 85, he's finally confessing the bombshell he's kept hidden for decades. The Beatles wanted him to join them, but he turned them down. Why would anyone say no to the biggest band ever? The shocking answer involves God, heroin, and a TV show he accidentally stumbled across while channel surfing. This is the confession that's rocking the music world. Dion DiMucci's story begins on the streets of the Bronx, where music wasn't just something you listened to, it was something you lived. Born on July 18, 1939, Dion grew up in a neighborhood where trouble was never far away. Fist fights, gangs, and tension filled the streets. But for Dion, those same streets also gave him his first taste of harmony. With nothing but a voice and a few willing friends, he'd create music right there on the sidewalks, bouncing doo-wop and Italian melodies off brick walls. It wasn't just fun, it was survival. And in those early days, Dion was already shaping the sound that would one day make him a star. His father, Pasquale, was a puppeteer by trade, performing in small theaters up and down the East Coast. The family barely scraped by, and Dion's mother worked in the garment district to help make ends meet. Pasquale wasn't exactly a role model. He taught Dion how to shoplift and left him with more fear than comfort. Still, the chaotic bond they shared exposed Dion to something priceless: show business. By the time he was 12, Dion was already performing on Paul Whiteman's Teen Club show, getting his first real taste of what it meant to be on stage. Even in that mess of a home life, Dion found something to hold on to, an early love for performing that would never let go. High school gave him more than just a place to sing. It gave him Susan Butterfield, the girl who would later become his wife. Their teenage romance grew into a lifelong partnership, with Susan eventually helping pull Dion out of the darkest chapters of his life. While most kids spent their school years chasing grades or goofing off, Dion was chasing rhythms. He sang to classmates during lunch breaks, played for anyone who'd listen, and even recorded 4 songs as a gift for his mother. That little gift got into the hands of TV producers. And just like that, Dion was on his way. It wasn't luck, it was hustle. His musical world was a strange and beautiful mix. On one hand, his grandfather introduced him to opera. He'd sit in old Bronx theaters, mesmerized by the emotion and drama of Italian arias. On the other, Dion couldn't get enough of Hank Williams. He learned country songs by ear, singing jambalaya in smoky bars at just 12 years old. This wild blend of opera, country, and street harmonies turned Dion into something rare, a kid from the Bronx who could tap into almost any kind of music and make it his own. But behind all the talent was a demon that showed up too early. At just 14, Dion started using heroin. The addiction crept in quietly and took over fast. He split his time between singing on street corners and running with a local gang. His heroin habit followed him into adulthood and nearly killed him more than once. Meanwhile, after a rocky start with solo recordings, Dion decided to take control. He rounded up the best singers he could find in his neighborhood and started rehearsing, on subways, in hallways, wherever they could. That group became Dion and the Belmonts, named after Belmont Avenue. They weren't polished or trained, but they had something real. Their voices worked together like magic. Dion once said that each guy was doing something completely different on their early tracks, and somehow it just worked. Their sound was raw, rhythmic, and totally new. When they signed with Colombia Records in 1958 and released I Wonder Why, everything changed. The song made it to national charts, and they performed it on American Bandstand, instantly catching the attention of a country hungry for something fresh. Dion's voice led the way, but the whole group brought something special. They mixed classic doo-wop with street swagger, jazz, and even opera-like precision. They didn't just make music, they invented a new sound. Their biggest hit came in 1959 with A Teenager in Love. At first, Dion didn't even like the song. He thought it was too soft, too wimpy. But once the Belmonts added their signature harmonies, he changed his mind. The song exploded, hitting number 5 on the charts and becoming an anthem for broken-hearted teens everywhere. Even in the UK, it topped charts in multiple versions. The song didn't just make them famous, it made them timeless. That same year, they joined Buddy Holly's Winter Dance Party tour. It was brutal. Dion DiMucci was just 19 years old when he found himself face-to-face with a choice that would save his life and haunt him forever. It was the dead of winter in Clear Lake, Iowa, and the Winter Dance Party tour was already taking a toll. Long hours, freezing bus rides, and barely any sleep. That night, Buddy Holly had had enough of the broken-down tour bus. He managed to charter a small plane to get ahead to the next stop. Holly invited Dion, Richie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson into a dressing room to make the offer. But there was only room for 2 of them. Who would get the seats? There are different stories about what happened next. Some say Valens flipped a coin with guitarist Tommy Allsup and won. Others, like Dion himself, claim he flipped a coin with Valens and won, but turned the seat down. For Dion, it wasn't just luck or a gut feeling. The ticket cost $36, and that was exactly what his parents paid for a month's rent back in the Bronx. To him, it seemed ridiculous to spend that much on a short flight, especially when money still felt precious. He passed on the flight. A few hours later, the plane went down. Everyone on board died within minutes of takeoff. The headlines would call it the day the music died. Dion didn't find out right away. While the others flew, he and the remaining tour members boarded the freezing bus. It was a miserable ride, one of many, through snow-covered roads. When they finally reached their hotel in Minnesota, Dion walked into the lobby and saw a TV flashing the news. The crash, the deaths, Buddy, Richie, the Big Bopper, gone. It didn't feel real. He had just spoken to them, shared a stage with them. Now, he stared at the screen, frozen, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. It could have been him. But surviving came with a cost. Dion already had a dark past. He had been hooked on heroin since he was 15. He had overdosed before he ever had a hit record. And now, after the crash, the survivor's guilt dug deeper than anything he had felt before. He kept thinking about what could have been, about why he was spared. There were no therapists, no time off, no help. Just more shows, more fans, more pressure. On the outside, he looked like a star. On the inside, he was falling apart. Even after losing 3 major acts, the tour didn't stop. The company behind it just brought in replacements and told everyone to keep performing. Dion had to get up on stage night after night, pretending like nothing had happened. The audience was grieving too, but the music went on. He wasn't allowed to slow down. The industry didn't care. As long as the tickets were sold, the show had to go on. That stretch of shows after the crash left a scar on Dion. He was still just a teenager, carrying a pain he couldn't explain and didn't have time to process. The years that followed weren't easy. Fame didn't fix the pain. Money didn't make it go away. Even after he earned millions and released hit after hit, he still felt lost. He would stare out the window of his penthouse and ask himself, What the hell is wrong? It wasn't until almost a decade later that things finally began to change. When Dion DiMucci walked away from the Belmonts in 1960, it wasn't just the end of a band, it was the start of something much bigger. They had been one of the top doo-wop groups of their time, but Dion felt stuck. The others wanted to focus on harmonies, and the record label pushed him to sing old standards. But Dion, he wanted to rock. He wanted raw sound, guitars, and freedom. Behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Money fights and Dion's growing heroin problem added to the tension. Still, he told fans in a letter that the split was friendly. He called the Belmonts his closest friends. But as the Belmonts faded into the background, Dion exploded onto the charts. In just 3 years, he racked up 20 top 40 hits and proved he didn't need anyone to shine. But the road wasn't smooth. Just as Where or When was climbing the charts, Dion was checking into a hospital to fight his addiction. He had been hooked since his teenage years, trying to cope with a rough childhood in the Bronx. There were no therapists or grief counselors back then, so he turned to alcohol and drugs. The pain deepened after the tragic plane crash that killed Buddy Holly, someone Dion deeply admired. He later said the crash felt personal, like a sign. The rehab stay in 1960 wouldn't be his last, but it was the first real step toward healing. A fight that would stretch on for nearly a decade until he finally got clean in 1968 with help from family. While he was still wrestling with all that, Dion released Runaround Sue in 1961. No one expected what happened next. The song exploded, hitting #1 and changing everything. And it all started in a schoolyard, where Dion and his friends used to mess around, banging on boxes and humming riffs. He wrote some words, added a beat, and it just worked. The lyrics sounded like a jab at a girl named Sue, but the real story was about a girl named Roberta. He only switched the name to Sue because it fit better, and maybe because it happened to match the name of the woman he'd later marry. The song had energy, soul, and edge. It wasn't just a hit. It was a statement. Dion wasn't a background singer anymore. He was front and center. Then came The Wanderer. While Runaround Sue was still sitting near the top of the charts, Dion dropped another bomb. Originally, the song wasn't even meant for him. It was passed over by another group, and his label put it on the B-side of a single. But radio DJs flipped it, and it soared to #2. The song was cocky, catchy, and full of swagger. It painted a picture of a man who drifted from girl to girl without a care in the world. But Dion later admitted that under all that confidence, there was sadness. The guy in the song wasn't happy. He was lost. The original version even mentioned a bottle of beer, but the label changed it to something cleaner. Ironically, that small change gave the song a deeper meaning. Dion's cool exterior masked a man who was still searching, still hurting, still fighting his demons. By the end of 1961, Dion had gone from a Bronx street kid to a global star. He was touring across countries and sharing stages with legends like Chubby Checker. His songs were featured in movies, his records were charting overseas, and people everywhere were singing his lyrics. At the end of 1962, something happened that nobody saw coming. Dion DiMucci, the street-smart rock and roll star from the Bronx, signed a deal with Colombia Records, a label known for classy crooners and orchestras, not loud guitars and teen anthems. Even crazier, Colombia's head of A&R, Mitch Miller, hated rock music. He once called it musical baby food and thought it was killing real music. So when Dion walked through those doors, he wasn't just joining a new label, he was walking into enemy territory. But he didn't flinch. He had already proven himself with hits like Runaround Sue and The Wanderer. And now he wanted something more. He wasn't just chasing fame. He wanted respect. Colombia, for all its snobbery, needed rock's commercial power. Dion was the proof that they couldn't ignore it anymore. He didn't waste time. His first single with Colombia, Ruby Baby, hit number 2 on the Billboard charts. It wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. Originally a Drifters song, Dion made it his own. He gave it a bluesy feel, changed the rhythm, and laid it down in one take. It was gritty, smooth, and real. Colombia had tried to dress him up, but he kept his edge. The album that followed did well too, making it into the top 20. In a time when other 50s stars were fading out, Dion was evolving and proving that he could keep up, maybe even lead the way. Then he did something nobody else had thought of. He took his hit, Donna the Prima Donna, and recorded a version in Italian. It wasn't just a gimmick, this was personal. It was about honoring his roots while reaching out to a new audience. He used the same backing track as the English version, which gave it a familiar sound but with a fresh twist. That move was bold, especially in 1963. People weren't used to hearing bilingual rock songs, and yet Dion made it work. He wasn't just singing for teenage fans anymore. He was showing the world that music could cross language barriers, and he could lead that charge. But behind the scenes, there was a secret ingredient to his sound that most fans never knew about. A vocal group called the Delatans were with him every step of the way. After Dion left the Belmonts, he found these guys in New York, 5 singers who could match his energy and blend perfectly with his style. They sang backup on all the big hits, from Runaround Sue to Drip Drop, but never got credit on the records. Without them, those songs wouldn't have had the same punch. They worked hard, even when Dion gave them tough and strange vocal parts to learn. Some thought he was nuts, but those harmonies helped define early 60s rock. They were part of the magic, even if their names never made the cover. Still, being with Colombia came at a cost. Their idea of success didn't match Dion's. They paired him with producer Robert Mersey, who was used to working with artists like Barbra Streisand and Johnny Mathis. Not exactly rock and roll, but Dion tried to make it work. He recorded songs that kept some of his street sound, while exploring deeper emotional tones. Some songs leaned toward dramatic pop, almost like Roy Orbison's style. Others added elements like Spanish guitar and mariachi horns. Strange, but they showed Dion wasn't afraid to experiment. Even when Colombia pushed him to wear tuxedos and sing standards, he resisted. He didn't want to be the next Sinatra. He just wanted to be himself. But then came the British invasion, and everything changed. The Beatles showed up, and suddenly, American radio stations stopped playing Dion. He wasn't alone. Almost every American rock artist got pushed aside. Dion's songs dropped off the charts, and fans who once loved his Bronx swagger were now screaming for British accents and mop-top haircuts. Ironically, the Beatles respected Dion enough to put his face on the Sgt. Pepper's album cover. But by then, he was already struggling to stay in the game. He even tried going to Europe to find new fans. But the momentum had shifted, and it was hard to catch up. Hoping to recapture the old spark, Dion reunited with the Belmonts in 1966. They made an album called Together Again, hoping for a comeback. The music was solid, and the songs had heart, but it didn't connect in America. The single, My Girl the Month of May, flopped at home but did okay in the UK. They performed on TV, played small venues, and gave it their all. But the world had moved on, and the reunion quietly fizzled out. Meanwhile, things at Columbia got worse. The label still didn't know what to do with him. They wanted tuxedos, lounge songs, and safe choices. Dion wanted grit, soul, and raw emotion. He made an album in 1965 called Kickin' Child, one of his best, but Columbia shelved it for more than 50 years. He even got into blues, thanks to producer John Hammond, but Columbia didn't believe there was a big audience for it. Eventually, Dion had enough. He walked away from a huge contract and left behind a lot of money because he couldn't stand being boxed in anymore. As all this played out, something darker took over. Dion had been battling heroin since he was 14, and now the pressure and disappointment made him slip back into addiction. He had first gotten clean after his split with the Belmonts, but now the drugs came calling again. He once said it felt like heroin had a voice of its own, whispering to him, calling him back. He kept trying to quit, but it was a war he couldn't win. At least, not yet. Everything felt like it was falling apart. His career, his direction, and his sense of self. Then, in April 1968, something unexpected happened. Dion had a spiritual awakening, an experience so powerful that it pulled him out of the cycle for good. He turned to faith, joined a 12-step program, and finally kicked the habit. Soon after, he was offered a chance to sign with Colombia Records again. But they had one condition. He had to record a song called Abraham, Martin, and John. At first, Dion didn't even like it. It felt too different from what he was used to. But when it came out in 1968, it exploded. The song hit number 4 in the United States and reached number 1 in Canada. It sold over 1 million copies and opened the door for a comeback that no one saw coming. Even more surprising, people were moved. Thousands of letters poured in, thanking him for the message. Over time, Dion came to understand why the song mattered. It wasn't just about famous men. It was about hope, courage, and the dream of a better world. The success of that song helped Dion discover a new musical direction. He began moving away from the doo-wop and rock and roll that had made him famous. Instead, he started exploring deeper, more thoughtful material. He signed with Warner Brothers and released albums that reflected his personal journey. His music became richer, influenced by blues and folk sounds, especially those introduced to him years earlier by Columbia's John Hammond. This change wasn't just about sound, it was about identity. He was no longer a teen idol. He was now a grown man with something real to say. And even his peers recognized that. Bob Dylan had already seen something in Dion and insisted he appear on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. Dion was beginning to stand among giants. While his career was shifting, his personal life was also transforming. His daughter Tane was born in 1966, just as he began to fight his demons. Then, in 1969, he and Susan welcomed their second daughter, Lark. A third, August, would follow later. Dion took fatherhood seriously. He was determined to give his kids a better childhood than the one he had. Growing up, Dion had only known criticism and chaos. Now, he wanted peace. He kept his family out of the spotlight, building a home that felt safe and full of love. That choice became one of his greatest successes, not on the charts, but in life. Then came another turning point. In December 1979, Dion became a born-again Christian. That changed everything again. For most of the 1980s, he dedicated himself fully to gospel music. He released 5 Christian albums and found a new audience. His song, I Put Away My Idols, won him a Dove Award and even got him a Grammy nomination. It was a complete reinvention. For nearly 7 years, Dion stepped away from secular music. He was focused on faith and purpose, and for a while, that was enough. But in the mid-70s, just before his gospel era, he had tried something unusual. He teamed up with the infamous Phil Spector to record an album. Spector, fresh off a terrible car crash, was becoming more unpredictable than ever. The album, Born to Be With You, was released in 1975, and it bombed. Dion hated the production and distanced himself from it. Yet, strangely, years later that very album would be rediscovered and praised as a hidden gem, especially by indie artists in the 90s and 2000s. What once felt like a failure slowly turned into a badge of underground credibility. Then, in 1989, Dion stood on one of music's biggest stages. Lou Reed inducted him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a surreal moment. Dion, who had once been dismissed as just another teen idol, was now being honored by one of the most respected voices in rock. Lou read a poetic tribute and made it clear: Dion's influence ran deep. He wasn't just part of history. He helped shape it. That same year, Dion returned to secular music with the album Yo Frankie. It was produced by Dave Edmunds and featured a lineup of legends: Paul Simon, Lou Reed, K.D. Lang, Patti Smith, Bryan Adams. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a celebration of everything Dion had become. The album brought his voice to a new generation through MTV and VH1. Songs like King of the New York Streets and the Night Stood Still captured both his toughness and tenderness. Critics had mixed feelings, but fans connected with the raw, honest sound. The Beatles didn't put just anyone on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. When they chose Dion, it was a clear nod to how much they respected him. He was pictured right next to Bob Dylan. There were even whispers that John Lennon wanted to work with Dion, but his managers brushed it off. By that time, Dion had already started going in a different direction. While the Beatles were diving into psychedelic sounds, Dion was pulling back. He was searching for something deeper, something more grounded in blues, in soul, and in personal truth. In 2020, Dion explained it simply. He admired their music, but he had his own path to follow. "I loved their music," he said, "but joining them, that wasn't my road." He had already begun a spiritual shift. In 1968, he had a religious awakening that changed his view of everything, including his music. He started writing with purpose, using gospel and social themes to tell the stories that really mattered to him. But the real turning point in Dion's spiritual journey came years later, and in the most unexpected way. One night in the 1990s, flipping through channels, he landed on a Catholic program called The Journey Home. It wasn't planned. He wasn't even looking for Catholic content. But something about the show struck him. People were talking about their paths back to the church, and Dion felt something click. That random moment turned into a deep dive. He started reading church history, studying early church teachings, and slowly reconnecting with the faith he had left behind. By 1997, he was ready. He returned to the same Bronx parish where he grew up, walked into the confessional, and fully embraced Catholicism once again. But before Dion came back to Catholicism, he spent nearly 20 years in Protestant churches. After getting clean and having his spiritual awakening, he didn't immediately go back to the church he was raised in. He explored. Assembly of God, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. He spent years in each one. He wasn't a casual visitor either. He threw himself into every denomination, learning theology and reading the Bible deeply, something he had never done as a Catholic kid. Looking back, he called it both rewarding and frustrating. Every time they switched churches, he and Susan had to relearn things. Eventually, his studies led him to the early church fathers. And that's when it all came full circle. He realized these guys were Catholic. That moment sealed it. He came home for good. When Dion talks about faith today, he doesn't hold back. He calls himself a ferocious Catholic. To him, that means not picking and choosing which parts of the faith to follow. He believes in the church fully and openly. He says he bases his life on truth, and he won't compromise on that. Even at an age when most would slow down, Dion kept creating music that reflected his faith. His album Bronx in Blue came out in 2007 and was praised by critics. He proved you could be spiritual and still rock hard. He wasn't trying to separate the two. He made them work together.